So this is where my hood making has taken me. This is what I think is the best hood that I make. This accordion back blocked on this new hood block. Started hood making about 45 years ago. Made my first hood in, I believe it was 8th grade, and made a pattern from another hood that I managed to get, an Indian hood, and sold that hood for $2 to a friend who was also getting into falconry. And from there I just kept trying to outdo it and make something nicer and better. And at the time, when I started, I didn't have access to birds. I was able to get birds, shortly thereafter. It was just a long process to get to this point in my life. I've been doing it a long time and gone through a lot of different transitions, trying to get exactly what I wanted, which was a perfect fit of one of my hoods on a falcon. And they also fit goshawks and red tails and Cooper's hawks and pretty much everything else out there. I've made eagle hoods, I've flown eagles, golden eagles, and same thing. Even on the golden eagle blocks that I made, we had found a skull, a golden eagle skull, so we had something we could work with to make sure that I could make a hood that really fit well and functioned well. And so this is kind of where we've ended up. I don't see it going very far from here, as far as I don't believe I will be able to make anything that fits better now, especially with this new block. And for people that want to use these blocks with these beaks, they'll be available. They'll be more available. And anyway, it's been a long, fun ride. And I think I've finally accomplished what I've been after all these years. You never know, something may change, but I think my hoods are where they need to be. I believe the fit of the falcon is absolutely number one. Because we all know what happens when you put a misfitting hood on a falcon. You know what happens over time. They'll be hood shy. There's a lot of different styles of hoods, a lot of different makes and types, and I'm sure a lot of them, do well. But what's most important is, do they fit well? And I think if they do fit well, then they will look well. Also, they'll look natural and accurate, and that's been my goal all along. Hi, I'm Steve Tate. I've been making hoods for about 45 years now, and I have made, throughout that time, I've made plenty of mistakes trying to figure out what would work best, what would fit best for the falcons that I've flown, and falcons and hawks that I've flown. And now at this time in my life, I feel like I've got the hood that's the best fitting hood that I've been able to make, and I've learned a lot of different things over that time, what works and what doesn't work, and I just want to take this chance to share this information with you, and hopefully you can gain something from it. Hopefully, even if it's just something small from this video, you'll learn maybe to do something a different way that'll help your hood making. And I think everyone should know how to make their own hoods. Okay, so we just thought we'd talk a little bit about the anatomy of a hood. This is the Dutch hood. It has a what they call like a smiling beak opening, basically to go around the whole gape of the bird's mouth, around the lips of the bird. This is the top knot, this is the centerpiece, this is the eye panel, and these are the braces. And I should mention here these fabric braces. These are 2-ply Ultrex that my wife actually makes, and I may have mentioned that elsewhere. She makes them for falconers. If anyone needs some, contact me. And I think it was Jim Nelson that was the first one to produce these Gore-Tex braces. I think he might have gotten some Gore-Tex at the time, but Gore-Tex is very very firm about you not using their name, and this is not Gore-Tex, but it's similar to Gore-Tex. It's got a white film that gives it a little thickness and gives it more friction, basically. So, and this is an Arab hood that we are going to. I'll show you how to finish with braces. All right, so we're going to look at the tools of the trade. Right here we have a high quality set of leather scissors, leather shears, made in the UK. I'm not sure how long I've had these scissors, but it's probably been at least 30 years. I used to take them, occasionally you'll need to sharpen them because when you're cutting through a ton of leather, occasionally they'll need to be sharpened. Well, I used to take them to a sewing business where they sold sewing machines and things like that, and they sharpened. Well, they just really weren't doing that great of a job, so I actually risked ruining them, took them to a grinder, which I do taxidermy as a living, and so I have to sharpen my knife all the time. Well, I sharpen it on the grinder. And so I took it to the grinder, and I was amazed at how sharp I was able to get them. So anyway, that's one of the basic tools. This awl. Now this is an awl that Ron Rollins designed, which I just love. This is this is one I used for years, and if you can see the difference in sizing, makes a world of difference. And like I says, this thing, this red-handled one, I made, they sell them, and then they come with this stainless steel spike. Well, the spike is, first of all, it's too big, and second of all, I like to have a little bit of it's hard to see, but I've got a little bit of a curve in it, because when you go to push into the leather, you don't want to come out past that surface edge. And then when Ron developed these and sold them through Western Sporting and Mike's Falconry, I had to try it out, and it's great. It's a spring steel. It's sharp. It stays sharp. The only thing I really did to modify it is, just so you know, I'm left-handed, so this is going to be maybe a little bit, this whole video, maybe a little bit backwards for you. But the steps are the same. But so all I did was kind of flatten this so that I have a guide to keep this bent part of this on an uphill swing. So that's what I poke all my holes with. This I actually use for cinching down thread after I've sewn the hood, and I'll show it to you later in the video. These are a must. You can see these springs right here, these two springs, make it open automatically. I have glue stuck here, but so this is, I used to use my fingers to push the needle through the holes in the hood, but over time it's just, you know, and you make calluses and that, but over time it's just not sensible when you have tools like this. So you can just grab the needle and run it through. And I can, you know, I'll probably use this in the video too. So these things are very inexpensive, maybe $4 or $5 from Hobby Lobby. Easy to find usually. Scalpel. It's not a scalpel, it's an X-Acto. I like these blades. This is I buy these blades, they're XL, they're made by XL, and they sell them in a 100-pack. Well, they also have a 5-pack, which they call their super sharp blades. And occasionally they'll make a pack like this, and I don't know if they've changed or whatever, but every blade in this 100-pack is one of their super sharps. So I don't know if I got lucky or whatever, but the 5-pack blades are like $3.49 or something. These things here are like $22, you know, off of Amazon. So so I go through a lot of blades, so I just, you know, buy a lot of them at a time. One thing I will point out further in the video is how I use the blade and the kind of angle you need to use when you're cutting out leather. I use two different chisel points, basically, and I think this is actually an X-Acto. I don't know if XL makes these chisel points, but basically I use two different sizes. This I ground down to make that width. It's a little bit narrower for the top knots on the hoods. This is a tool that I honestly don't remember where it came from when I got it, but pretty sure you can find something like this very similar. I'll show you where I use this on the hood, but it's mostly on the top knot and embossing, just to kind of clean up the embossing, the embossing, what the marks that the embossing wheel makes. This is, I believe, a 12-hole per inch roller. You buy them at, you know, sewing fabric stores. Sometimes we'll carry them, or you can get them off Amazon. If you want, there are other tools available. I think Mike's Falconry sells them. I'm not sure. David Western Sporting may sell them, but they have different. It's a little better handle, and it has different spools to put on there depending on how far you want your holes placed. But this is the one I use. It's, you know, it'll last through several hundred hoods really, and you know, when it's gone, you know, when it's not working, this is usually where it fails, and when it fails you just throw it away and buy another one for a few dollars. This is my beeswax. I buy it in a little clump. They sell them for like, I don't know, $5 or $6 at Tandy or wherever, and this is invaluable because I use this size D. D is in dog beading thread, and it is tough. I mean, you look at how thin it is, and it's just very tough for its size. It's bonded nylon, and you know, I pull it anytime I'm doing any sewing, whether it's on the hood or the chin strap. I pull it through the leather, I pull this thread through the wax to make sure it's waxy, and I'll explain some of that further in the video. And I just put these are number 7, size number 7. I think they might be quilting needles, I'm not sure, but anyway, that's size number 7 is the one I use, and I think it was recommended by Ron Rollins from his old video. So we'll show more of that later. This is the FID that I use for a lot of different things, mostly on the top knot, on the leather lace on the top knot. let's see, I'm trying to think. I don't really use it. Well, obviously I use it to also use to put braces in the hood. So we'll show that usage later. This is my little tool that I made 100 years ago. It's basically just a wire that I made. This is how I mark the distance on the hood from the edge of the hood to inside where I'm gonna roll out my holes, right? So it's about 2 millimeters, and I'll show you how I use it when on a hood, when I cut out the hood. Yeah, we'll just look at that when we are showing that part of the video. This is my burnishing tool. This is actually probably about 40 years old. Roger Claude made this for me. I was 19 or 20 years old back in the, maybe a little older, back in the early 80s, maybe late 70s. Anyway, I made a hood for him, and he saw me using what I had, and I don't remember what I had, probably just a wooden dowel, burnishing this hood, and he went and in his wood shop made me this piece of wood, and I've used it on every hood I've made for the last 40 years, 40 plus years. So, and I just sand it and keep it kind of, you know, so the dye doesn't bleed onto another hood, but it really actually absorbs the dye well. So I really don't have to do anything very often on it. So that's my burnishing tool. And then my embossing tool. This is the pattern I like. These are, I don't know, I think they might be made by Osborne. No, let's see. Yeah, I think it may be U.S. Osborne. Yes, it's Osborne. And you can get different wheels depending on what type of design you want on your hoods. And this, last but not least, is hole punch. And I just barely finally wore out my old English. These are made in England also. Just wore out my old hole punch that I used for probably about 40 or 45 years. So these things are very durable, and hopefully this will last as long. Okay, so let's talk about leather. The leather industry has changed over the years, and when I first started making hoods, we used to be able to get some really high quality calf. They called it kip, and that has almost completely gone away. We can still get it. It's pretty good quality from some tanneries. I've got a cutting coming from a tannery in the UK right now, and hoping it's what I want. But I believe it's probably cow that's been split to get to my specified thickness. I like for calf 1.5 to 1.6 millimeters thick, and this is kangaroo veg tan, natural, or they may call it bark tan kangaroo. This is a hide here. This is what they call a heavy 60 square decimeters. You can see they stamped this. This is from Packers Tannery, sold by Mike Searing right now. I think Western Sporting will be carrying these too. And this is typically, the heavy weight is typically 1.1 to 1.2, which, would I like it to be thicker? Yes, I would like it to be 1.3, 1.4, but only if it's this perfect consistency. So I've got a set of calipers. This is what I, judge it with. You can see the dye on my hands. That's something you'll have when you make hoods. So you can see this is it's just a little over 1.1 thick. A couple other spots you might get a little bit thicker, but really high quality leather. A lot of people will tell you that it's not sturdy enough for a large hood, And I believe that that's partially true. Like for let's say a jerkin size bigger, and actually I make quite a few jerkin size hoods out of kangaroo, especially if I've got a good extra heavy kangaroo, which will be pushing 1.4 millimeters. But actually this 1.2 millimeter leather will be just as stiff when you're done burnishing it, be just as stiff as the calf that they sell nowadays, that's 1.6 millimeters thick. So what's that, 25% thicker. So if I can find the right calf, I will use it on the bigger hoods. For the smaller hoods, of course, I like the kangaroo a little bit thinner, even for Merlin type hoods. Very easy to work with, very easy to poke a hole in. It's very tough, and frankly it's just the highest quality leather on the planet. So like I said, if I can get really high quality calf, or even cow that's got the right density, that's in that 1.6 millimeter range, that's what I'll use on the bigger hoods. And if not, then I'll use the heaviest kangaroo, the cleanest, heaviest kangaroo that I can find. This is this is what they call Italian kangaroo. This is what I use for chin straps. And it looks like I just tried to find some online from the company that I used to buy it from. I mean, I'd buy 2 or 3 hides at a time, so I would go a year or two without needing any. Well, now it appears as though I'm not able to find this online. So what I'm probably going to do is, there's a woman in, I think she's in British Columbia, who sells kangaroo lace. And I just recently spoke to her, and she's actually got some she now stocks a few colors. She's actually got some that's 8 and even 10 millimeters wide. So if I measure this is just a piece that I've cut that I'll use for a chin strap. This is 8.5 millimeters wide. So I think the 8 would work, and the 10 might be a little too much. So I'll probably either buy some of that lace from her. I can buy some kangaroo. I think it needs to be at the very maximum. It shouldn't be over 0.6 millimeters thick for a chin strap, and I'd like it probably closer to 0.4 or 0.5. So anyway, I think that's what I'll be doing. I'll just be cutting my own chin straps. I've enjoyed this leather for the last, I don't know, 20 or 25 years. But like I said, the leather industry is changing, and these things just become more and more difficult to obtain. Okay, so I'll just take a minute to talk about dye. This is Phoebings, and then this is Angelus dye. And this Angelus dye, actually, Jeremy Roselle was the first one to tell me about this Angelus dye. It's dye he was using way back when, maybe 25 years. I mean, it's been a long time, 20 years anyway. And I really like the Angelus dye. They've got a lot of colors. They're not as opaque as the Phoebings dye. You can thin the Angelus dye, but you don't want to thin it too much, maybe 20 or 25%. Whereas a Phoebings dye, you can cut it in half and hardly lose any opacity. So, even though it's, $5, $6, $7 a bottle, this stuff has gone up like everything in price. It's something you can extend quite a bit. And we'll go into, we'll look more at the way I dye the hoods in the video here a little bit later. One other thing, this is the contact cement that I use. It's, there's nothing special about it. I think it's just like any other contact cement. I've used it for a long time, and I just get it at Home Depot, and I like the little brush that you know, it comes with. The only problem with it is, and you can see this is a little bit thick. You get to where, just because you don't use very much of it, this one's halfway gone, and you can't, I won't get a much more life out of it because as it's exposed to oxygen, it starts to set a little bit just over time. So anyway, that's a few more things I use. Okay, so now let's talk about hood blocks. It's quite an important subject to me anyway. When I started out making hoods, well, first I was a kid when I started, and my first hoods were Indian hoods, and of course I wanted to make a Dutch hood. So I kind of learned how to do that, had to teach myself, just like most falconers learning how to make their own, jesses, hoods, whatever. And by the way, I think every falconer should make their own hoods. They should make their own equipment. Not necessarily gloves. Gloves are very, accessible, but I think it's important for a young falconer or new falconer, no matter the age, that they learn how to make their own equipment. And I think hoods, I think everybody should learn how to make a hood. That doesn't mean, I have a lot of clients that have made their own hoods, and actually some of them are really pretty darn good hood makers, but for whatever reason they'll still buy one from me. The hood blocks that I started with were basically made out of plaster. Even prior to the ones that Ron Rollins made and sold, I'm trying to think how long ago that would have been. It had to have been at least 30 years or so that Ron Rollins made hood blocks and made them accessible to the public. I was just kind of making my own out of wood or plaster or whatever I thought would work. Well, when I was able to use some of those Rollins hood blocks, I felt really lucky to be able to use those, and because they were really pretty darn close as far as what I was looking for. And I learned a lot from that, those sets of blocks, and that video that Ron produced really had a lot of that, basically what we're trying to show here. He gave us all this ability to see how he goes through the process, and it was very helpful to me when I was young. And I knew Ron at a pretty young age. But anyway, at some point, after using his blocks for 2 or 3 years, at some point I decided I wanted to build something that I thought maybe I could even make something even better. So I have a friend I've had a longtime friend who is a pattern maker. He's done it for a living for as long as I can remember, and he is very precision minded. I mean, he is probably the most, when it comes to precision, I can't think of anyone more capable of making just something that's perfect, whether it be a straight line or any type of a sculpture or cutting or whatever. But and I compare him to something like a machinist, someone that makes rifles. He's that particular as far as when it comes to precision. Anyway, he was kind of my help getting these blocks made. So and also when this is okay, so this is our first attempt at a hood block, and this was, when I say our, I mean me and Robbie Coleman. I was good friends with him when we were young, and we both kind of wanted to do the same thing, and so we both kind of went into this together. And this is the first hood block that we came up with, And love the shape. It's a little bit longer in shape, not a huge amount of eye relief, but what I think is just the right amount, really a good amount. This was actually our first product. Now this is just straight resin, and I'll explain why we used resin. And what happened was we used this block. We made a few different sizes, and we tried them out. And I even made a few hoods for a guy to test out. It was a breeder, and he tested a few hoods out. And in the meantime, we made another block, and we actually made it. It was just a little bit shorter. It has the appearance of a little more eye relief, even though I don't think it actually physically does have more eye relief. And we used that for quite a while. And I actually made those blocks into a full set, and I sold those blocks. That full set of blocks, I think it was 24 sets. And eventually sold all of those. After I sold like 20 or 30 sets of hood blocks, I really didn't want to be a retail dealer, and I sold that business to Mike Searing, and those are what we call the tape blocks. And Mike, to this day, Mike still sells those. I think he's done real well, and I think a lot of people, have owned them and used them, and they still, to this day, I mean, there's still people using them, making really nice hoods off of them. But interestingly, I went back to this, what we called, those tape blocks we called the B block, because this really was what we called our A block. After I went back to these blocks, I really liked the looks of it. The reason I think I like the looks of it, because it just has a more natural, it looks more like a falcon's head. So anyway, I was able to, after I went back to these blocks, I was able to obtain a skull, a peregrine falcon skull from a breeder off of a female peregrine. And I actually tweaked this skull a little bit. What I found is that the crown wasn't quite high enough on the skull. And there was a couple other things, but that was one of the things I noticed, and so I tweaked it a little bit. And then what I decided to do was to take the beak, both mandibles. Well, I made a mold of the skull of the peregrine, and what I did is I cut the beak as both mandibles with the curvature going back into the head. I cut that off of the plastic mold that I made of the head, and I placed it on these on this A block. Well, after a lot of tweaking and a lot of messing around with it, this is what we came up with. And it was my friend who does the pattern making that helped me with this process. So what we did is when I first, you can only make these things so symmetrical, and I had already used him to make the tape blocks symmetrical, our B block, with this process. They take a very expensive camera, and they take 3D images of this object, and then they plug it into a CNC machine and make two negative, what are they called, molds. And of course they have to have keys so that you can key them together. Basically, you put these, the drill comes in and drills this out, so it can't be any it can't be any cuts inside, so everything comes down straight. What all you have to do is sand this out. This product right here is actually a very dense foam, polyurethane foam. It's they create it just for this type of work, to be carvable and to be able to be cut out on a CNC machine with drill bits. So anyway, after you sand this nice and clean and just keep it smooth and wax it up, put them together, then you pour a mold in here. And and this is, this is the product. I had to design so this was, I kind of did on my own. And with this new block, then I had to design a pattern. And we're gonna talk about making a pattern also, so you guys can, kind of figure out patterns for your own blocks. But I found these to be I've used these blocks since, with the beak on them since 2011. That's when I developed them. And they seem to be doing very well on the market. I have sold several of these sets. And, if you want, if you would like a full set of these, then you'd have to contact me, and they're not inexpensive. They're fairly expensive, but they will, I think you'll be able to make the kind of hood you want to make as far as fit goes, which, is what I think is most important about hoods. Also, I will talk about this. This hood block is actually made it's a mixture of Bondo and resin. Well, the reason I mix Bondo in with the resin is it doesn't shrink quite as much as just the pure resin. And so what I would do is I would take an original mold like this. Well, it's very expensive to make these, so I would take and use Bondo and resin poured in here. It comes out at about 2% decrease. It shrinks about 2%. So then I could downsize this. So if I only had six or seven of these originals, I could shrink another 2, 3, or 4 down, and then the next size I would start with this, just have them cut this at, say, instead of 100%, I'd have them cut it at 90% or 88%, and then I would pour, or 92%, and then I would start again with the same process, with this shrinking process. And that's how I came up with the same, with this, 24 block set, from, say, female red tail on down to a kestrel. So this is first generation, and I don't have the B block, the Tate block, because I sold that business to Mike Searing. And then this would be the third generation. Now I am working on this block, and these are just for me. I'm not going to sell these to the public. They're just kind of for me. And I made this block to have a little more relief in the back, so it's a little bit wider in the back. You don't really need this ridge, I decided, anymore to center it, because the beak, if you line up the beak properly. And I'm waiting, this is the jerkin size, this is the only size I have, but, and I'm working on getting the full size. Hopefully in a few months I'll have, about 10 or 15 different sizes in this block. So this is the fourth generation, and I really like the way they fit. I'm still working out all the patterns and such. So anyway, if you're looking for the Tate block that's been on the market for quite some time, I'd have to say at least 15 years. You can get those at Mike's Falconry, and he sells patterns for those. Okay, so if you are trying to determine what size hood you need for your bird, I believe both Mike's Falconry and Western Sporting has size charts. In fact, I know Western Sporting does, and they do a good job of it used to be the measurement would be across the top of the head, between the eyes, and it doesn't necessarily correlate exactly with a hood block because you've got the eye relief. But I believe Western Sporting has a really good, and I'm not sure if you can just pull that off of his website, or if it's for sale. If it's for sale, I'm sure it's not very much money. But if you're wondering about sizes, that's probably the best route to go, because when somebody calls me looking for a hood, asking me what size, I do get questions. people aren't wondering what size of hood they should get for their bird. Well, I have to go by my hood numbering system, and my system, you know, I know what it's going to fit basically, you know, within one or two sizes, and so I can tell them where to start, and because I don't really measure, you know, across the top of the heads anymore. Okay, so let's talk about hood block making. Let's see, a long time ago, like when I was like 20, early 20s, there was a bird artist that I absolutely loved. His name was Raymond Ching. He lived in New Zealand and then had a second home in the UK, in Great Britain. And he did these super fine, detailed, beautiful gouache bird paintings of all kinds of different birds. Sparrows, macaws, just everything. He was really well renowned for it. And his agent in, let's see, I think it was West Virginia, I was able to write him a letter, and he wrote back. I sent him a picture of a drawing that I had done, a falcon drawing that I had done, and he wrote back and said, nice job, and this and that. But I asked he was very cordial, and I asked him about like hyperrealism and in drawings and paintings, and how you know, we don't want it to look too much like a photo or that. And he made a comment about you can get 20 people together, you can put a photograph of a sparrow out, put 20 artists out there to draw that sparrow or to paint that sparrow, and he says, and you go, when they're finished, you go and look at every one of those drawings, and each one will be different. And I really took that to heart. And the reason I tell you this story is because it's absolutely true with hood blocks also. These are this without the beak was probably my first, I believe it was my first block. And like I stated earlier, we made it with Robbie Coleman, and then we came up with this, which is the Tate block. This is the one that Mike Searing sells. And in between, I've got some others here. And also, of course, when you're thinking about the hood block, you have to think about the base. Well, sometimes the base doesn't, you know, there's different angles and slopes and that. This is just an older one that I played with and never really did much with it. This is my newest one, and I'll talk about this one later. This is actually my eagle, the biggest original eagle hood block that I made. And this is the actual model that I made from an eagle skull. You can see the clay, you can see it's not as clean and symmetrical. I had to go around the beak with the clay and that. But this is, basically this came from here. And of course this is smaller, but I had to start for, you know, for like the bigger eagles. So, so what I eventually started with, not in the beginning, I didn't have the knowledge or you know, the access to bird body parts and that, and you know, it was kind of iffy how legal it was and that. But at one point, I was able to get a peregrine falcon that had died, and I had made a mold of her cast. Now this is actually a jerkin that I had in 2011 that died from aspergillosis, and I just had him in the freezer, and I made a death mask or death cast, whatever you want to call this. I actually put a little clay in this eye. I tried to inject him with water and to fill him up, and it just wasn't going to happen. It had been in the freezer for too long. But you can kind of get an idea. Look how flat the top of the head is. Now you have to realize this is, when I molded this, it's wet, and it's, you know, it's older, but it's wet. And here's a top view. So after I molded this, I sent this to a guy and had his skull cleaned with beetles, dermestid beetles. And the reason I think it's important to look at the skull, you can kind of see it's, it shrinks whenever you dry them out, and of course the skull's going to be a lot smaller than what's under, what's the skin and the plumage and that. But what's interesting, the most interesting part about this skull is this part of their protection over the eyes. They, when I skinned this, there's a very thin film that goes over this here, and then there's muscle underneath where this, where this crevice is. There's muscle under there, and it flexes. They can move the skin and that, and the tissue, the skin. I don't know how thick it is, but there's tissue under the skin, and then plumage on the head, and we have to always take that into account when we're thinking about making a hood block. And so once I have a sculpture, and we'll work on the sculpture in just a minute. Once I have a sculpture of exactly what I want, then there's another process that we can go through. This I found out about thanks to a good friend, Blaine Hartwell. Basically, this is my new, I just got this back yesterday. It took me about 2 months to finally get to these, but these are my new hood blocks. These are for 1/4-inch dowels for keys. So what we'll do, and I'll probably get this done tomorrow, is we'll go down, cut this in half, key these up, put it together. We have to build ports for the material, and pour blocks. And this way, we have, basically this has been photographed by a 3D camera, very expensive camera. What we actually did with this is we cut it right down the middle, and you have to know people that have very precise minded and want to get, we basically take a measurement from here to there and different measurements and cut it right down the middle and set that piece on a flat table, and that's when they photograph that, and that's where they come up for this. This is, I don't know what this material is. We used to use butterboard, which is a really dense foam. This is a little bit different. I think this is less expensive, and this process is fairly expensive. So probably to do, let's see, it'd probably cost you, between $1,000 to $2,000 to have this done if you wanted to make your own full set of blocks. And then you've got to pay for the plastic. This plastic is, they used to call it Perfect Tool back when we made this. Now it's got a different name, but it's still the same thing. It actually has, it's very dense. It actually has the same filler that they use in Bondo. The difference is this doesn't shrink. It doesn't get really hot like Bondo and resin. This is pure resin. This is a Bondo and resin mix, which I should explain here. The reason I use Bondo and resin mix, about half and half quantities, is because this shrinks generally about 2%. So if you want to take and not go to the full expense of doing this, you can get a large one, and I recommend doing one about every 5 sizes, so about every 10% you have another one of these made, if that's the route you want to try and go. And then you can pour them out of this, and it'll shrink them fairly consistently down to the next size. The problem is there are certain things that change slightly as they shrink, and that's why I say you need to go in and do another one at 10% lower, on 2% increments. These are on 2% increments. And because then you go back to the actual block, and you're basically starting over, and you've got a little leeway there. And so let's maybe do a little bit of sculpture on this death mask. Here we have some Chavant clay This is a medium, sulfur-free plasticine. I like the medium because the hard is just a little bit too hard, and this is going to be a little bit, still a little bit too cold. What you want to do is heat it up, but basically you have to decide where and how much. You have to think about how much eye relief you want. This kind of clay doesn't dry, it doesn't harden. It does harden when it gets cold, but it's always somewhat pliable. So you have to kind of decide. Now this, of course, I can't show you this whole process on video. You're going to have to experiment yourself with it. But if you like to sculpt, now on this head, these feathers will be raised up. Probably less than 1/4 of an inch, but they get a little bit of a crown in the middle. This is a very important point. Profile-wise, you want to make sure you've got clearance over the top of this crown in your blocks. But basically, you don't really need to add. Really, the only thing you're going to add is eye clearance. That's the biggest portion of the hood block you're going to add. Look at the cheeks. You want to be able to, it's a little too stiff still. This is, see if I can get this to thin down a little. You're basically just going to go around this whole head, because the feathers actually do have quite a bit of volume, especially you know, on a gyrfalcon, but they basically average out to be similar. And let's see, we'll try a little bit more. I'm trying to keep this somewhat brief. Now obviously, you can't have the hood. The block has to end down in here somewhere, across here. And that brings up a subject about beak openings also. You will need to, if you're going to do this and not pay somebody else to do it for you, you will need to get some experience on molding. It's not really difficult. It just, there's a lot of different materials out there nowadays. There's still some feathers on that. Basically, you get the gist of it, but you've got to come down. This has to be blocked off in the front for his neck. You also want to be able to, one thing I've had a lot of people comment on is that my hoods, with the generous beak opening that I have, my hoods, the birds can usually cast out of my hoods. And it's not just the beak opening, but it's where you've ended the block, stopped the block underneath the chin. And this is starting to take a little bit of shape, but you can see it takes a fair amount of work. And I don't know, think about this. This is, of course, just the beginning, but you can, well, actually it's kind of like that. But you can see where I'm headed with it. This block, you can see it's pretty flat on top. I like that. One thing I like about it the most, though, is the amount of room in the back of the neck. Not sure. I mean, honestly, I'm still learning. And I think I mentioned that I made this block about 6 years ago, and just kind of didn't do anything else with it, and finally decided I need to try it out and see, and I really like it. Made, I don't know, 20 hoods or so off of it now, and put it in some hands of guys that use it on their birds, and they absolutely love them. So I've been encouraged to keep going with that. And anyway, just to keep this video short, once you get this, you need to work it just like I did that eagle one that I showed you. There was a mold of the clay sculpture. That's basically where you need to start. And of course this, you're going to want to bring this down. There's a lot of feathers. There's a lot of feathers, neck feathers and that actually need to be filled in for that bird to be comfortable. Basically it needs to go around the base of that skull. Down in here, it needs to tighten up enough to where the bird can't pull it off. But other than that, you can put as much of yourself into this sculpture as you want. You can make these eyes just, you can make as much eye clearance as you'd like. It's just kind of a personal thing. And then when you make a mold of it, you're going to have to cut that beak off. But I would mold it as is, and then cut the beak off, reshape it, make sure everything's good, and then remold it again. Molding materials are fairly expensive. The silicone, like a gallon of RTV rubber, can be like, I think it's like $130 or $30 or something like that, and you can go through a gallon pretty quickly. You can make molds of something this size, which is maybe not quite female gyr. Maybe it is female gyr, yeah. It's close, female gyr hybrid. You would only get like 6 or 7 of these out of a gallon of RTV rubber. And so that's that. I'll quickly show you how to make a mold. I don't have the materials, I don't have the silicone rubber or any of that, but I'll show you just quickly how I start a mold, and you can pour the silicone in after that. So. Okay, so basically all you need is some good cardstock. I just grabbed this. You're going to want a piece of masonite or something similar, something with a slick bottom. You want to mold this block. You take the block, put a dab of hot glue on there, squish that on there so it holds it down, and you're basically going to have to make a mold around that with at least a 1/4 inch clearance. That's what RTV rubber requires. And so I basically just take this, so what you can do is cut it in half, or of course I've got big sheets of it, and I just cut a length. You figure out how tall you need it. You can go about, 1/2 inch over or 1 inch over, doesn't matter. Take a length and you make a cone. You make a cone with this. Now this would work on a smaller block. It's a little small for that, but you're basically making a cone with this. You're going to tape it just with some, not masking tape, but the clear Scotch tape or whatever. Okay, so basically what you're going to do with that cone that you've got taped together is you're going to just touch a little hot glue and just hold it for a minute. Make sure it goes all the way around, at least a 1/4 inch clearance on the farthest bits. You might have to make it oval or whatever. It doesn't have to be round, it just has to fit that block, but it needs to clear it by at least 1/4 inch. And you can hot glue this down as you go. I usually just hot glue it one spot, hot glue it in the opposite side, then 4 places, and then once those are dry, you can just go around the whole thing. Well, at that point, you can basically mix up your RTV rubber, and that rubber tends to have it's a little thicker than soup, a little thicker than like cheese soup. And so the problem with that is you want to make sure there's no air bubbles. So really, before you put your cone over this, what you should do is mix a little bit of that RTV rubber up, right to specs, the right amount of catalyst, and then take a brush and brush it on. This is when the level comes up, it can trap some air. Ideally, you'd have it in a vacuum. The vacuum sucks all the air out, and that's ideal. But you know, you can get around that. You don't have to have a vacuum. Basically, you just want to brush the silicone on the whole mold, let it kick a little bit. I don't even know if it's necessary to let it kick, but, and then you can, well, it is. You have to let it kick, because then you're going to have to take a little scalpel or something, cut away the stuff that ran out the side, cut it away, pull it off the masonite, and then put your cone on and hot glue it. And that's basically how you do it. Just, you know, just have it so it goes at least a quarter inch above that, and you've got a mold. And hood blocks come out of those molds really well, you know, if you don't make it too elaborate. And so, yeah, and then you've got something that you can use. You can use Bondo and resin to shrink it, or you can get some of this plastic material and make permanent blocks. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to try and show you how you guys can make your own patterns off whatever blocks you're using. I've had a lot of questions about making patterns, and I've made a lot of them over the years, and I've used a lot of different ways to do it, but I'm kind of, I've gotten to where I'll just make a quick pattern, make a quick hood off of it, and see how it fits, where it doesn't fit, and then redo it. And this is my new block that I'm using just for myself, that I had to make several patterns on, and it took me, I think it took me 3 or 4 tries to get the Dutch hood pattern right on this block. And what I normally do is I try and find a center. Now this has a partial beak on it. I shaved this part of the beak off because the only part that I really need is the mandible, where the leather needs to be flared out, and this square bottom, the lower jawbone, is very important for you know, to lock that hood into place when you put it on the bird. So anyway, so what I do is I try and find a center line on the hood block. I think it's about like that. This shouldn't be too, you know, if you don't have a really symmetrical block, then it might give you a little more grief. But even still, you have to come up with an idea of what you want your hood to look like. Where do you think the chin strap should end? And I've got, I could take measurements. In fact, I could measure this hood for you if you'd like. The height on this hood is, let's see, 46, just a little over 46 millimeters. So let's see where we're at on this, see how close I came on my guess. Pretty close, within, you know, a millimeter or so. So, and honestly, a millimeter on the height of a hood is not gonna make one bit of difference. But as you get better at it, you'll have a certain style of hood you want to make for yourself, and you'll refine that depth, you know, the way it fits your birds. So anyway, we take this, and I've already molded hoods on this, so I've already got a line where I want to come off on that Dutch. It's somewhere in there. So basically the hood is going to fit that block about like that, right? So in here, you want to look at what type of design you want on the inside. Well, I like that beak opening to be pretty wide, so I bring that out and bring this tail down. The tail, this part of the hood is the tail, and actually I like them a little bit wider than that. You have to think about, when you're designing your pattern, how wide do you want that tail, because you're going to put slits in for braces, 3 slits. So you think about that, and the reason you want one on this side of the hood is because it makes the hood much more stable. It strengthens the structure of the hood, is what I meant to say. This, when you put the brace on, it basically if you don't use this, if you make all three of them on this side, and which is fine on a one-piece hood, but on a three-piece hood, you'll see that this part of the hood where you've stitched it will become weaker and more flexible. But if you span that stitch and put the brace across there, then you'll see that it's, you know, it's just more stable, it's more sound. And so basically that's what your pattern's going to look like. Now, a lot of different ways you can go at this. If you've got some rubber latex, you can get rubber latex at any mold making type of a store, or I think craft stores for the most part carry this stuff. You can brush it on, peel it off, lay it down on your sheet of paper after it cures, of course, and it won't lay flat because this isn't flat. So you just kind of mold it, you kind of push it and try and get it as flat as you can. If it doesn't lay flat, you tape down the bottom and you push it. While you're drawing it, you just kind of lay the pattern out. And same with this. Now I like to do only the 1/2 because when I make a pattern, it's going to look like this. For obvious reasons, that's the best way that I've found to make it symmetrical. So when you do the same thing with the latex. Now, I don't use latex anymore. That's what I used to do. I'm kind of always in a hurry. So I just lay some paper on and I hold it and just draw on the paper as I'm coming through, or cut it and just draw it as I'm going around like this. So basically you can use the latex, or you can you know, just use a piece of fabric works well for this. You can lay fabric down and mark the fabric and then cut it out. The fabric will lay flat on your paper, and that's basically how I make a pattern. Now, the exception to that is if you want to make an Arab back, you know, that accordion backed Arab type style hood. So on a block like this, you have to think about when you close that accordion, it doesn't close the same way as a Dutch. This when you close a Dutch, this hood meets the other, this part of the end of the hood meets the other end. Well, on an accordion back hood, you have about 5 or 6 sections in there that meet. So the accordion actually has to be bigger in the back than this hood block. It doesn't fit tight. My accordion hoods, when I block them, they do not fit tight on the back because there's not as much cinching, because there's less cinching because you have those little sections. So you have to consider that in your pattern, and you will have to test it. So what do? You cut it out, you make a hood. You can bond it if you want. I'm pretty good at sewing and pretty fast at it, so I'll usually sew a hood up. So I have an actual hood to try on the block, and I try it on. Well, the first mold I made for this, first pattern I made for this, I had leather bunched up right here. And this was really the only place I had it bunched up. So obviously I had to take some of this out so that it fit tighter here. So I'd run this back a little bit, this line back a little bit, and this line back a little bit, because I had too much leather in that spot. Well, it took me a couple more tries and I got the right fit, and now I've got a pattern that fits it perfect. And I'm always trying to experiment to see what I can make differently, and it all comes down to how it fits the bird more than anything. So hopefully that will help you when you're going to make patterns for yourself. Okay, so this is how I cut out my patterns. When I make patterns and when I copy them, I basically just get the thickest cardstock. I didn't put a lot of pressure on that, just enough to scribe it to where I can bend it. So I use the thickest cardstock available, and then when I need it, they're on increments of 2% increments. Pretty much any copy machine will do that nowadays. So if I wanted to, if I run out of a 16, I can just raise this 2% on a copy machine. And I know there's some little differences in the way you do that, but I've found that to be adequate, an adequate system. I don't need it to be 1.76%. It's 2% has been adequate for what I'm doing. We gotta, we're working with leather here. So what I try and do is go down the middle of that black line. I actually, on the beak opening, I actually will stay closer to the inside of the line. On the middle of this line, on these cardstock patterns, well, they just don't last very long. So what happens as they're wearing down, if you use them very much, I've tried other ways to do patterns, and I still come back to this cardstock. I've used plastic and some other stuff, but I still keep coming back to this cardstock. And what the downside of it is that I have to cut out patterns fairly often to keep them right, keep them proper, the right size. So what happens when you're drawing or when you're scribing this pattern onto the leather, I'm putting a lot of pressure here because it is a good thick cardstock, even with the new blade. Okay, so what happens when you scribe this onto the leather and you lay this out flat on the leather and you put pressure on this edge, well, this edge starts to deteriorate, starts to fold in a little bit. And after you do that enough times, and you kind of have to determine that when it's time to get a new pattern, cut out a new pattern. But after you do it enough times, you're actually making a smaller hood. And same with the inside of the beak opening, you're putting the pressure against the paper, and so it's rolling the other way. So if you use it too long, you're going to end up with a smaller hood with too big of a beak opening. So you have to, if you're going to use cardstock, you have to do this, fairly common. I'd say I don't really pay attention how many hoods I get out of one pattern, but it could be 10, somewhere in that range, 8, 10, 12. I have never thought about it. I just look at it and think, oh, I need a new pattern. So I do keep patterns around, copies, I have a pretty good stack of copies of each pattern usually. And we like the center hole where it's at. So even on the pattern, I'll just go in and cut that out also. It's not a critical how big that hole is, just so you have a mark of where you want that on your hood. And then we'll cut this one out. Basically try and stay on the center of the line. This line's a little finer, it seems. You don't have to push quite as hard because it's only one thickness, single thickness. I'm glad I've still got good function of my hands. Don't know if it'll last forever, but for now I can still use them pretty well. And that's the pattern. So let's go ahead and move right on to scribing the pattern onto the leather. This is a piece of kangaroo. It's a fairly clean piece. I didn't notice these marks. I don't worry about them too much. I think it's just dark, something dark. But you really want to start with something very clean as possible. I actually like the body of this. try and avoid scars. One thing calf, usually you can expect to, whether it's kangaroo or calf, you can expect to have about 25 or 30% waste. That's just the way it is. So even, you know, if you're paying $15 a square foot, you can calculate there's going to be some waste in that hide. So basically, I take this and scribe. You got to keep pressure on that edge. If you get off a little bit, you can just come in from the opposite direction usually. And this doesn't happen to, or this doesn't have to be super clean. It doesn't have to be a super clean line, but it does need to be accurate. Okay, since I know this is going to be a 15, I'll just write 15 on here, because a lot of times I'm doing this to 6 or 8 or 10 hoods at a time. So now we'll scribe the eyepiece. Leave enough room. I'm going to dye them just slightly different colors. Be sure to flip it. Okay, now you can use scissors or X-Acto blade. Cut them out, just because we're going to do them a little different color. If you want it like solid black, then yeah, you just leave it the same and dye it all together. And I like, this is how I dye all my leather. I don't dye the back side, only this side. I leave enough room to where I can come in with the X-Acto blade later. And one thing with kangaroo, there's a couple different ways you can do it. It's a little bit thinner. Even though it's very dense, the dye will still, you'll get little molecules of dye coming through the back side, especially if you wet it really heavy. I try not to get the sobs too heavy with the dye and try and keep it down, but that doesn't always work. All right, so we're going to do this dyeing. Let's see, we'll do the darker brown on the eye panels. And I don't like to load too much dye, especially if you're only going to dye one hood. It takes very little. You want to make sure you get the whole thing dyed, and you don't have to really go over it any more than that. If you watch it, it looks like it's going to be consistent, then you're good. One thing about this kangaroo leather, it's thin enough that the dye can, some of the molecules of dye will creep through. You can see them right there. So what I do, it doesn't bother me. I don't, make a big deal out of it. But what I do is I just turn it upside down so there's no more gravity pulling it through. The other thing you can do with this kangaroo leather, calf that's 1.6 millimeters thick, I don't think I've ever seen dye creeping through it. Not because it's more dense than this, I think it's just because it's thicker. But the other thing you can do is if you want to keep that perfectly clean, like I said, it doesn't bother me, but if you want to keep it perfectly clean, spray this down with water. What happens when you get this wet, you don't have to get it super wet, but you don't have to soak it, but if you spray it down, it will suck up that water. What happens is those cells in that leather, I don't remember exactly the terms, but they swell up. So it basically becomes impenetrable when you when you wet it down to dye it. And that's just a personal, personal preference. See, so this, I got to go a little bit further. But I don't, you want to keep it very little. I don't like it puddling up. And this hood, this will look pretty clean when it's all done. It'll still look pretty clean on the inside. Watch it for just a few seconds. Make sure it's not, some of this dye, sometimes it just isn't consistent, and you have to kind of add a little something to it. So that's it for dyeing. Let's see, turn it upside down. So now what we'll do is, this is kangaroo lace, 5 millimeters wide. This lace I get from a woman in, I think she's in British Columbia. On the internet she goes by Naughty Linda, Knotty, Naughty Linda. And she has all kinds of kangaroo lace. This is just the natural 5 millimeter lace. I buy it in a 50-meter spool, and it's about $100 for a spool. It's like everything, it's going up in price, and I expect kangaroo to go up even more after the fires they've been having. And so what I do is I just take the dye, and if you spin that little bottle in your hand, the lace will kind of slip in there a little easier. This is where I get dye on my fingers, and try not to here. And you want to do this, you want to dye this lace the same time that you mold the hood, because it takes about the same time to dry. And I'll typically mold about, between 4 and 6 hoods together at the same time. So I'm usually dyeing, 10 strands of this lace, different colors. And so it'll take, a few minutes to do that. But also this lace, I cut it. I believe this lace, I've cut it 9 inches. I used to do 10 inches, but really it's kind of a waste if you're just doing a couple of top knots. 9 inches is plenty good. And if you want, also you can bevel this lace, and you can, with a little extra work, you can get some pretty round, nice round top knots. And I'll show you how to tie those top knots in a little bit. Okay, I think we're going to cut this hood out now, and I think I'm going to put my heavy-duty glasses on for this, just to make sure I make a nice clean cut everywhere. Just not as young as I used to be, and that's all right, because I know what the alternative is. So I like to now remember, I'm left-handed, and if you look at the angle that I'm cutting this on. So if you're right-handed, in this section, you're going to start here, okay? So what happens is right here on this V, I'm cutting it, I've got about a 15% angle on there. I want it to be in a little bit, okay? So if I do that here, what I run into is I'm trying to turn this back the other way. It's awkward, so it doesn't feel right. So what I end up doing it right, is I just come in, I cut the end of this tail off, and then come in this way, just so that I can have the same angle on my blade. And you don't have to, after you do this for a while, you don't really, it just comes natural. You don't really think about the angle. It just kind of comes naturally. And there, and you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but you want that angle on there. When it comes time to poking holes and sewing it, that edge needs to come together. and you want that surface edge to come together rather than the leather edge, right? So we'll just go and finish this. Still, like I say, I don't I don't really think about the angle. If it's a little bit off, it's not something that's ever been a problem. Pretty important that you stay on the line. And there's no rush. I just have done this a lot. So not too slow at it. Okay, so this is something new I'm going to show you that I just started doing recently. When you put a hood on a bird, it the way that when you cut that to a corner here, you can see it on the bird, on the gape of the bird, there's a little corner that's kind of sticking up right there. And I've done it for a lot of years, but I just decided I don't like that corner anymore because the natural curve of the lip is there. And so this is what I've just started doing a couple of months ago. And I like my good heavy duty glasses on here, these two power glasses, so that I can get this nailed in the right spot. It's kind of critical that you get that. So I'll hold it a little bit, just kind of test it if I'm in the right spot, make sure I'm in the right location, and punch it out. This way we'll have a nice rounded corner. And it also makes, when you go to cut that beak opening out, that also makes that a little easier to do. Now this is something that I like to do also, and I just scribe, not very much pressure, just a couple pounds. Scribe that line with the X-Acto blade, and what happens, I can show you what happens. I got that hole just slightly high, but it won't make a difference. So you got to be careful about this. You want to be right on your line. You really only have to go in just barely into the edge. Let's see, I'm a little bit off right there. So so you can see the difference. So when I bend that leather, you can see. And after you mold that, it's a lot easier to find that line. It's basically started. So we'll just finish this. And this part's pretty boring. The lights that we're using for this video makes this pretty easy. It tells me I need to get a better light. My hood making bench. Oops. Make sure when you get back you find that same spot. If you have to change a blade or something. Okay. Now we have a hood ready to mark. So now we'll mark the hood. Take my little tool that about 2 millimeters. If you want to go on kangaroo, you can actually go a little tighter than that. Jim Osborne, I have one of Jim's hoods, and just great hood maker, and wish he still made them, because I wouldn't mind having some more of his hoods just for my collection. But he has the finest stitch. His cross stitches are about the smallest I've ever seen. I think they are the smallest I've seen, and I think his X's are probably 2 millimeters across, you know, across the whole seam. Whereas when I mark, this is 2 millimeters on each side. Now, of course, when you put tension on it, it's probably down to about a 1.5 millimeter. So basically, I just, but I am envious of those stitches that Jim Osborne used to make. Gosh, they are clean. Basically just wetting that edge, no reason to wet anything else. You want to, you know, I'm all about making them as quickly as I can, so I don't really want to wait. I don't want to waste time. And I put my mark distance from the edge that the hole marker needs to be, and just roll this out, try and find the spot where it belongs, right there in the corner. Doesn't really matter where it ends up, because you're gonna, sometimes you have to adjust that. Now, one thing that I noticed early on in Ron Rollins' video is that I didn't like the way he did his, you know, just personal preference. I didn't like the way he marked his centerpiece and eyepieces. He did this just the opposite of the way I do. So I'll explain this here. Make your mark there. So on the bottom you can come in and use this, but you can't use it here because the distance isn't accurate. And what Ron would do is he would pull them this way. He would mark this with the roller and pull them this way. And I found that just didn't work as well for me. So I just kind of changed it. For me, I changed it the other direction. And maybe it's just because I'm left-handed, but I think it had something to do with the distance. I just come in and mark them. Line it up. I don't know if you can see that. Around the corner, you have to be a little slower. I used to time myself how long each one of these steps took, and always trying to shorten them, you know, to shorten the time it takes to make the hood. And I was pretty happy to find out it took me about 2 hours and 20 minutes. This was a while ago when I started a hood, start to finish, when I was timing these different little steps. So this is, I can see this right here is probably going to line up by the time I get there, just from experience. But sometimes it'll either be short or long, and you have to make little adjustments. If your pattern, even if your pattern's right on the money, see that? It's actually a little bit long. So I'm going to come in and just scoot this just a hair, just not even half a millimeter probably, and go about 5 or 6 more holes, and then try it again and size it and make sure it's right there. It's not quite there. So we'll just put it right where it needs to be and mark the rest of the holes. And those little gaps like that will, you know, because it's leather, it's very forgiving, and it will it will take care of that usually. In, you know, if you're not careful and you have to make up too much, sometimes it can bunch up a little bit and leave, you know, it's just not quite as nice and clean. But on something like that, that won't leave any lumps or bumps. Okay. with this. Sometimes for me, a lot of times this side doesn't end up exactly the way the other side does, and it's hard to say exactly why, except I think we just, you know, depending on which hand we use and that, there it's just a little bit different from side to side. And I think it may even have something to do with the way we sew a hood. Could make it fit the block a little off symmetry. And I can't really prove that. See, this one looks like it's too long, and I have that problem with this side all the time. So I'm going to just start making my little adjustments right now and see if I'm right when I get a little closer. See, now it looks closer, even though I didn't adjust very much. When you get closer, you can decide how that's going to come in. Yeah, I still have a little bit. Ooh, very close. Now this little bit will probably be about all it needs. See, if you watch that hood, that center body moved on me a little bit while I'm marking the holes, and that's all it takes to set it off just a little bit. So you kind of have to hold it down pretty good. So that should work. There's some guys that like to cut these tails long, sew it up, and cut that off, and I've never found that a reasonable way to go. And for some, I think that's just the way they've learned how to do it, and that's what works for them. But I've never had a pattern problem to where I've needed to do that. So this is how I've always cut out my patterns and marked them. Okay, so we just marked this hood, and typically I'll mark 5 or 6 hoods at a time. And by the time I get to the 6th hood, the first one is dry. You can see this one's still wet. And I usually don't poke holes when it's wet. The reasoning is because it's wet, the leather gets a little more dense. Because like I told you, those cells and molecules, whatever, that expand, makes it a little more dense. Now in kangaroo, it really doesn't make much of a difference. In fact, you might even have cleaner holes if you do them when they're wet. But in a really dense calf hide, it can make a difference, just because it takes a lot more force to go through it. And I can tell the difference here. It does take a little more pressure to push through the wet. And the leather, because it's wet, the leather does flex a little bit, but it shouldn't. If it's good quality kangaroo, it shouldn't make a difference. So when I'm poking these holes, I'm doing my very best to go as deep as I can without breaking the surface, right? If I do break the surface, then I just come back out and redo that hole. One thing, that's close, but it still didn't break the surface. One thing too, that leather has these flaws in it that you don't know about until you stick your awl in your finger, or it goes right through the leather and goes right into your finger, and that happens too often, I guess I should say. But kangaroo, I don't really see that very often. So anyway, you're basically pushing against your finger. I'm left-handed again. You'll be doing it differently, of course, unless you're left-handed too. So I could tell that was going to go too deep. So you have to have a little bit of a feel for the leather. And I think it's a little easier when it's drier, when it's completely dry. It's still staying underneath that surface. Okay, so we're going to start stitching a hood, and I will typically pull out probably about 5 feet. It's right in there. You know, it depends on the type of hood. It depends on the size of hood. And I definitely don't ever, so I'm going to pull this through the wax a few times, but I definitely don't ever want to run out of thread while I'm stitching a hood, because I'll be pulling it apart and starting over, and I'm not ever in the mood of wasting time. Yeah, some of that beeswax will kind of, this works really good if it's a little warmer. I'll put it like on my lap or whatever to keep it kind of warm, and it softens it up, makes it more pliable. Needle, thread the needle, and I just use one needle. I just make a slip knot here, tighten it down, and ready to go. So I'm left-handed again, and I'm going to start on this side, which is probably opposite of where Minnie will. You can see the needle there. Get your little curved, these things are great. Should slip in like that. And we're going to pull that through halfway. Sorry, this is going to be a little, basically halfway. And we're going to go back through it again. And if you can, try not to get caught up in that first pass, because what you want is to have a little bit of flexibility there, because when you go to cinch these, you're going to have to pull it tight. You can tell if you've got it, because if you pull it and it easily goes either way, then you didn't catch that other thread, so you're good to go. It's got a little magnet to it too. So these, when you're starting that corner, that first thing, you really want to try and get them to line up. And even though your holes, you poked your holes and everything, they still can be off a little bit the way they line up. Try and keep that out of the way and just kind of keep it lined up for those first 4 or 5 stitches until it'll stay there. This is a little bit, this is just slightly awkward from what I'm used to doing. I'm usually sitting back. I actually like to watch or have the TV going. I'm not necessarily able to focus on what's on the TV, but I can kind of watch TV while I'm doing this, and it takes out some of the monotony. My wife will get mad at me if we're actually watching something that she thinks I should be watching. And I'm like, now wait, what happened? She gets a little annoyed sometimes with me. Well, maybe often. Of course, right here at this point, it doesn't hurt to check your seam, watch how it's coming together. You don't want to go on the wrong side of it. White thread against black leather is very visible. Okay, so we've got a couple more. Last one. Sometimes you have to make sure you're in the right hole. Everything looks pretty clean. And you can leave it like that, or if you're feeling confident that this is going to be free, you can go through it one more time. and that will kind of hold that in place. At that point, it doesn't matter if you go through the other threads. So let's clean the needle and put this other strand through. Okay, so if you look at this, you can see it's just not real tight. It looks okay, but it's not super tight. So what we're going to do is, if you know this is going to be free here, we're going to start on this back side and cinch those down. This is where, again, that beeswax comes in handy on that thread. You'll see, I'm not getting a lot of string there, but you can see I'm getting some. And as I pull, I only skip one. You can skip two, but then it gets really, well, that wasn't bad, but it can get pretty tight. So I'm just kind of in the habit. You can see how much slack I'm pulling. It gets bigger and bigger as I go. And you'll have, by the time you could have 2 inches of excess thread there by the time you get to the end. In fact, I might have more than that on this hood. This is a must to keep that seam tight. Yeah, we're going for 2 inches. I might just get 3, 2.5. You can see how much slack I've got now out of that. Just keep it tight. This one you can, when you get close to the end, you can just do that one. And then if this is clean, you can pull it through tight. Okay, then get your needle, and we're going to go the opposite direction. Make sure you're clean on that end. Let's see if I can get the lighting. You don't want to come on top of that string. You want to make sure you're underneath it, or you're going to have a knot. Well, not a knot, but easy to undo, but it's easier just to do it right. So on the second pass, this is where you can get into a little bit of trouble by going too deep. You want to make sure you got to check it. You can usually kind of feel it if it's getting too deep, or rather you can feel it if it's lining up. It feels like it's lining up, and you're probably don't need to check it. And the worst area that's going to happen is where the biggest bends are coming up here. But it's really annoying if you get a thread showing on the other side, because what happens is, once that happens, the next one wants to get even worse, and you'll have like 4 or 5, where you've gone through the surface on the opposite side and you've got that thread showing. And then you've got to take the needle off and go back, pull the thread back out and start over, at least on those holes, so everything looks clean. Oh, it should be good. This is the area where it tends to want to get a little deeper on you. This, you can kind of see this, you see that edge, that far edge, because for some reason this kind of sinks down a little bit. And so that's where you really probably have to be the most careful when you're stitching. Make sure it doesn't go through the other side. Lizard skin, adding lizard skin to it even makes it a little bit worse. You can see how that wants to stand up on that edge. I think we're still fine, but you have to pay attention to that look at it one more time before we go any farther and kind of push that out and make sure you can't see any. A lot of times you'll see if the needle's in it, a lot of times you'll see the needle, from the light you'll see a little glare off the needle, but that looks good and clean. So I think we're fine there. Okay, so we started in the middle here, went all the way around, and then we came back, and then we went around the opposite direction. This is so we don't have to put a knot here. It's just a clean stitch, but we do have to put a knot. The way I do it, I have to put a knot in this back side. So I'm just going to go through this last loop. Make sure everything's clean. Snip off that needle. And I just tie a couple granny knots. I like to go, I'm not sure where the phrase granny knot comes from, but I actually like to go, on the first one, I actually like to go through it twice because it really cinches better that way. And then lock it with the second one. And then lock it again with the third one just to be safe. And this is where this contact cement comes in. Now you guys that know knots better than I do, you might have a fancy knot that you can finish that with. I don't know of any that I trust. You guys that are like that make leashes, braided leashes and stuff, you might have a better way of finishing this, but I just dab a little bit of glue on, and actually it's a fair amount because I want it to be on the thread. And then I just grab both ends of the thread and twist it so that they're kind of stuck together. And snip it off, leaving about, 1/8 of an inch or more. And just kind of smash that wet glue back down. It doesn't matter which direction you smash it, but I like this better than super glue. I've had some of the super glue knots get really kind of hard, and even though it's under the braces, I just don't like it. So I use this glue, and that's really all there is to it. Now, while we're at it, we're going to prepare this hood for a chin strap. I've already got holes everywhere around it except for on the tail, and you can mark it if you want with this tool. It's more accurate, but I've done enough of these where I just figure I can just wing it. It's not super important. You do want to come out on the end with a nice finish. Let's see there. Okay, we're ready for a chin strap. We'll show that next. Okay, so we're gonna make a chin strap for this hood. I love this chocolate color. It pretty much goes with everything. And basically all you need is whatever will go around this hood. And actually you'll use less than that. So you can just snip it off right there and use this glue again. And you need to leave a little bit of glue on there. So basically, let's see if I can get a hold of this. Contact cement works really good for this, and I've never used anything else, so it's the only thing I have experience with. And you can, you don't want it too thick because you want it to dry in a timely manner. You really can't put this together until the glue has dried. That's the way contact cement works. So we'll actually just set it down for a minute and give it about 5 minutes or so to dry. Okay, this glue is dry now, and we can pinch this together. Basically just go down the whole length of it, try and keep it as even as possible. Match up the edges. This material is probably about, it's either, I'm going to guess, it's between 0.4 and 0.6 millimeters, and I think it's probably on the 0.4 side. And material that looks like it may be very difficult to come by nowadays. So I just take my tool and smash that flat. It needs to be, you could use anything really to do that. You could do this, just don't put your face down by it. Actually, my tool works better than that. This tool works a little better. It's got a little better flat bottom. Okay, then you're going to come in and do the same marks that you did on the hood. Just basically stay in the middle of the lace. And then you're going to poke some holes. Pre-poke. Come in a couple holes. Fine doing that. This takes about 10 minutes, so we won't bore you with doing the whole thing. We'll just finish this and we're ready to sew up a hood once we get this done. Okay, we have a hood that's ready for a chin strap. Since I'm left-handed again, I start on this side. Right-handed person would start on that side. On this chin strap that we put together, make sure that the rounded side, not the cut side, but the rounded side is on the inside of the hood. And find that first hole. Even if you can't get it in there, find the hole, you can still get it through. If it's thin enough, and I personally like as thin a chin strap as I can possibly get. Now I've got quite a bit of thread, probably 5 feet, maybe even a little more. We're going to not worry if we go through the other thread on this double loop. Yeah, if I can do this without. Okay, get a hold of that little tail. Maybe have a little too much thread, but we can always cut that later. Okay, so we've gone through it twice. Nice and tight. I'm going to come off this and finish this with my scissors. Basically just cut right along that edge. Get rid of that end. Pick up needle and start sewing. Oh, well, we're going to go through this back. Stay along the surface of the inside if you can, and try and come out that hole. You see that? I could have gone a little bit closer to that surface, but that's enough. With kangaroo, that's enough to hold it pretty tight. And that's, you're going to finish that end. All right. Make sure it stays down the middle of that. Pull it tight. Keep it all tight. Now as you go, every time you make a pass through here, you'll use up some of that wax that's on that thread. And I can already tell I'm about ready to use a little bit right now. We'll see how tight this one, see how snug these first two, yeah, they're staying pretty snug. Remember to stay on the, if you need to, check that back side. You want to stay on that, you want to keep that stitch hidden so it's only visible on the inside. You're not going to come back and cinch this, so it's really imperative that you keep it tight. It really has to stay tight. It's not a problem. So when you come to this, you're going to cross that section, you know, where they come together. I'm going to wax this thread one more time just so I have it good and waxed. And we're going to come across there. That's good and waxy. Basically, we're going to come right back to this hole. What happens over time, it's good to come back to this closer hole in the chin strap, even though these two holes are quite almost double the width. Because what happens over time as you sew this up, it expands. These the holes on the chin strap tend to get further away from it, further ahead of you. I'm not sure exactly what causes that phenomenon, but by the time you get to the next joint, you can fix it again by crossing those, you know, by having this, you know, a little bit wider, coming back to that closer hole. Kind of hard to explain, but you'll see it when you, yeah, make sure you stay on the inside. Up. I may just cut this thread down just a little bit. It's a little longer than I need. But like I say, you'd hate to have it too short, spend 45 minutes sewing up a chin strap, and then, I don't know if it takes me quite 45, but just saying you don't want to have to start over because you didn't have enough thread. There's a little glue. I don't know if you can see it. There's a little glue on that chin strap. Usually if you just rub it, you know, rub it, it'll kind of stick to itself and you can get it off. A little bit there, maybe stuck in a hole. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of this, and what I want to point out on this, on these joints here, you want to make sure you get good in the corner. You stay inside that surface, or don't go outside of it. And same with this one. Come back, go back in and try and get that next hole. That's why we go to the trouble of poking those holes. You look on this, see how loose that is. It's starting to roll away from there. That's something that you have to fix when you come back. And I'm gonna wax this thread one more time, which, you know, so on this hood I probably waxed it 5 or 6 times. You just want to make sure you've got plenty of wax holding that thread tight. And we'll, if we can find this hole, we'll finish this end, start back the other direction, and be done. The middle. Go through it one more time. Lock that on there. Make sure your thread's out of the way. And cut that off. Now we'll finish it like we did the other side. Where we came in, right there along that edge, close as you can to the surface. Going through that hole. Oh, see that right there, how I poked through the surface? You got to watch for that, so I got to take it back out. Move that a little bit. And so maybe it's sitting a little better. Try that. I got a little too close. Come through. That's better. Get a little wax. Whoops. Okay, so this is over the edge. Want to move that while it's still, you still have slack. Move that to the middle of the back and then cinch it again. Now you can start the other direction. Okay. And this way you really, the only time you need to wax your thread again is if it just feels completely dry and wax free. It'll actually stay pretty good through most of this process on the way back. Also, you want to roll, make sure you're rolling this. Some of these stitches will get kind of difficult to get in, and if you kind of are persistent about rolling it that direction, you'll get them to line up better. Try and come out in the same hole each time. Should actually naturally want to go in there, except when these roll pretty bad, it can get kind of tough to get them in. What's interesting is some of the other hood patterns I make, it seems worse, and I have no idea why. It's a one-piece Indian hood that I make. It really is difficult to roll towards the inside, which of course eventually is going to be the outside, but I don't understand why a different pattern would do that, but it does. All right, so I did wax the string one more time to get it to this point. About halfway through, it just kind of dried out a little bit on me. This really is rolling bad on the end, so about all I can do is just kind of roll it back and try and get that needle in that same hole. It's like that. That one more. It's a little bit hard to see, but basically just need to get it past that one last hole. It rolled on me a little bit. I don't like it, but I think it'll be fine. Now we'll cut off this excess line. tie this basically just the same as before. Tie it twice, cinch it down once more, and then once more just for kicks. And then a little bit of thread, or I mean glue. A little bit of glue. And this hood will be ready to mold. This way the string sticks to the leather. It really shouldn't change once that dries. All right, here we have a hood that's been sewn up and ready to be molded. So because of the excessive wax that I use on the thread, I like to use a toothbrush to clean this up. And I typically will do this under the sink with warm water. If you get too hot, the water too hot, you can get the leather a little softer. You might even, depending on the leather, you might even get it a little, you might even have it stretch just a little bit if you get the water too hot. So I just like to, use like a warm water, clean the stitching off, and basically get this whole hood soaked. Now if it's a lizard skin hood or something that you've laminated, then you really want to make sure you get it soaked even better. So even the outside, the eye panel, you want to see you'll see the edges start to soak because that water's getting through. You want to make sure it's soaked all the way through. At least in my opinion, I think you need it soaked all the way through so that you can, so that it'll mold everything properly. This is, you can see I've got a little bit of a ridge on the back of this block, and I'll use that as my center point. But even if you don't have a block like this, you can kind of tell just by tweaking it a little bit, you can kind of tell just how it sits, how it's going to sit on that block. And then you got edges standing up. So I take my burnishing tool and I just hammer the edges. If you've got it sewn up nice and tight, it should pretty much lay fairly flat. And this is my tool. You can use the plexiglass rods or whatever you've got, but even along the chin strap you need to get that leather down. If you have a little lip that's showing some leather coming through the seam, like it's not closing all the way, then you should be able to just kind of move this towards it and smash it one side or the other, and that should take care of the problem. This should be, the seam should be pretty clean. Shouldn't be able to see any of the inside leather that's the natural color. And just look at it really good. Get it to fit that block the way you want it. And when you pick it up again, this typically takes about 3 to 4 hours, depending on room temperature and that. And Just after this, you'll be ready to put lace for the top knot in after it gets somewhat dry. I like to leave it in this stage until it's at least, well, for at least 2 hours. It'll start to firm up. Once that moisture starts to wick away, this leather will start to firm up. And I don't cut the beak opening until it's really quite firm. It gives me better, it gives you something more firm to hold on to and make a cleaner cut. So actually we'll just set this aside and come back to it when it's ready to work on further. All right, so we'll take this hood that we molded, and first we'll put the top knot lace in. Now this is a just kind of a standard filled hood for me. What I consider a filled hood. I just double them up, shiny side down, and put both of them in. Pull them almost halfway. Excuse me. And get my fingers to work here. Put these in this way. So you want to pull them down so they're even. You find out the dark one. Let's see. Just want to make sure they're about even. You want to, and then these ones. Okay, and then come in here with your fid and get to that center, but you want the leather to be out. And actually the best way is to come in from here. Once you've done that, you can come in from here. One side and then the other. Slip. Okay, so there's your top knot lace. Don't need to worry about that right now, but because this is the way I block my hoods. Now, I use these blocks because I have them. I use these blocks to get the hood somewhat firm. They're very similar to the finish block that I use, so they transfer over really easily. Now, if you only have one of these type of blocks with the beak, it's not a problem to just go ahead and cut that beak opening up right after you mold it. It's just a little softer, so you have to, you just have to be a little bit more careful with it. All right, so because I've gotten older and my eyes are not quite as good as they used to be, at least my close vision isn't, I'm going to use this Optivisor, which is 2 power, to finish this beak opening. And I usually scribe this we'll just show. You can tell the leather's still a little bit wet because of the way it's squeaking. And on this, so when I'm doing this side, I try and keep an angle on this blade so that when I come out, I don't have to really trim anything. On my blocks with that beak flare, I don't want to have to really do anything with it. I don't want to change it. So I'm going to take my time. This is pretty crucial critical that you get this right. You don't want to have to come back and clean this up. You don't want to have to really change it. The beak holes that I make on my patterns are finished. I don't, for my blocks, they're finished. When I cut it out, I don't want to have to do anything. It just comes out ready to go on the bird once it's molded. So we're going to cut this beak hole out, and don't need these anymore, and place it on this new block. Now, like I said, you can, if these are the only blocks you have, if you got them for me, or I've, haven't sold too many of them. But if you do, if you have these, or if you get them, you really don't have to have an extra set of blocks. So it does fit just a little bit different. This block is a little bit different than the other one. And you want to place that and get that in place. You want to make sure you push everything so everything sits nice and flat. This tool comes in handy right here. You want to push this leather down into here, and that'll raise that top knot leather up where it's supposed to be. And then you've got a nice flat surface. And since we're probably about 2/3, 3/4 of the way for this hood to be ready, you can take and burnish it a little bit. Try and get that edge down. You want that edge to be as flat as you can get it. It does bunch up a little bit there. I like to, when I stitch a hood up, I like to stitch it pretty darn tight. And the thread allows for a tight stitch. So now I'm just kind of burnishing it, just trying to get it. You can see it's starting to shine up a little bit from the burnishing, but it's not quite ready for final burnishing. And before it is ready for final burnishing, we're going to emboss this hood. It's almost to that point now. It's still probably 25 to 30% still a little bit too wet for the burnish to really hold. This is something I love about kangaroo. It's just everything, every aspect of kangaroo leather. It's just tough to beat. It's just the way it molds, the way it sews, the way it burnishes, everything about it, So we'll come back to this in half an hour or so and burnish it and see if it's ready to finish. Okay, so we're going to finish this hood that's been drying for, it's probably been a few hours. It's finally to that point. It's not quite dry, but it's at that point where we can emboss it. So we'll take this. I like to hold it right against my body because you really need to put some pressure on this and hold it steady. I like this pattern. It's there's a bunch of different patterns out there, and I've just always kind of liked this pattern. Try and stay on that line. Actually stay off of the line. Just try and keep it consistent and get a good grip. And one last side. Looks good. Now there are some hood makers out there that don't burnish hoods. They do some really neat painting, carving and painting on their hoods. And they're beautiful hoods. I mean, Ken Hook, David Wadsworth, I think John Moran was one of the original designers. Those you know, Native American type designs and stuff on their hoods. They're beautiful hoods. They're just not. It's just not my thing. It's just not my kind of hood. And I like a hood that's somewhat. I don't want to use the word plain, but it's not. It's just kind of mostly earth tones. This tool works really good for this pattern. It just happens to work really well on these little triangle markings, and I'm just making them more impressionable so they'll look a little better when it's dry. Because I'm going to go on top of this with my burnishing tool one more time, or even a couple more times. I like to burnish them. I like them to polish about as much as I can get them. And now that it's most of the way dry, it's 80, 85, 90% dry, it should take the burnish really well and polish up pretty nice. And then even come in just a little bit later, maybe hit it again with the burnishing tool. Let's see, one more. I think it was Rob Coleman that he's the one that really showed me how to use that embossing wheel. He was doing this before I was even. Rob made some good hoods, some great hoods in his day. He eventually liked doing some double thickness type hoods, and they were just a little too stiff, just a little too stiff for me, for my liking. I know some people liked them, but okay, that should be that. And then we'll give it one more burnish. You can kind of see that it's just because it's getting a little drier and the little bit of burnishing I've already done. Now when you put the burnishing wheel to it, or burnishing rod, and a lot of guys use plastic dowels to do this burnishing, and I think they work. I'm sure they work just as well, but I've never used them. Like I said earlier, this is pretty much the only tool I've used in the last 40 years for this, and I think you can probably see that it's getting a little shinier. Also, when you burnishes, you'll see there where I'm putting a lot of pressure right there against that block. You can see the leather getting darker, and for me, I like that. It doesn't have to stay that perfect medium brown color. I like it's kind of like an antique type look to it, and so wherever those high pressure marks are, it gets a little dark, and I actually kind of like the look of that. So I think we're about done. Okay, so now that we've got this hood ready for top knot, let's tackle that task. I like to start, for whatever reason, I start here. I always start on this lace and go from there. So you guys all know how to tie boondoggle, right? Learned that in Scouts. Okay, so you want to tie it fairly tight. Come into the middle on this. This is the lace. It's going to come around itself. I mean, not itself, but what is the same color, the exact same color. So maybe for the video I might have used a different color, you know, a little more contrasting color, but you guys should be able to follow along. Right up the middle. So on top of that, up the middle, but on top of that thread, lace, we're going to do the second strand. So when you think about, when you're thinking about your lace, your top knot, and you know which color, these are very similar, so it's hard to tell which is which. But this color being on top of this other one, well, guess what? That's going to be on the outside. That's going to be the outside color. So if this was red, this red color would be on the outside. So if you wanted, so if the hood was black and red, and you wanted red in the inside, then you would have, you know, done that differently. I'll show you further on. We're going to do 2 top knots, so you'll have a little better idea when we get done there. And then this one again comes over it, up the middle and over, and it's around. You're going, it's basically coming around its same color. Okay, now we're gonna sort of tighten it, take up some of the slack. And one thing I didn't point out is that we're going in a natural direction, and I'll try and remember to explain that a little better on the next top knot, because I think where people run into problems is they're trying to tie it backwards or the opposite direction to which it naturally wants to go. So once we get it about there, still needs a lot of work. We're going to take some water, and let's get this with the water. We're just going to kind of roll it over this lace. And it doesn't just soak right in. It takes a minute for the leather to absorb it, because now it's dyed. It just doesn't absorb it quite as easily as it did when it was natural. So you just take 30 seconds, rub a little bit of water in there, and we're going to take your burnishing tool, come over to the edge of this, and tap it. Basically what that does is just kind of softens it up. It makes it a little more flexible, and it doesn't matter really where you start here. Just go in and start tightening it up again. And you can kind of tell which one you need to do next, the next one in order. And with that lace a little bit wet, it'll actually have a little bit of stretch to it. It'll get a little bit smaller in width, and it'll just kind of start to tighten up better. Now you can go crazy with these top knots and just keep tightening them, and they get, I don't know, you can make them a little bit too tight. So if you look at that, this seems not quite tight enough, where this is where we started. So I'll go around that one again. Yeah, I think we'll go around all of them again, but we're not going to go super tight. We're just going to carefully go over them one more time. Again, I'm left-handed. We're going in the direction that's natural for a left-hander to go. Right-hander will want to go in the opposite direction. You see where I'm pushing this fid in. If you don't get underneath that edge and you're pushing really hard, this naturally will go right into the tip of your finger. Trust me, this is calloused. I've poked through that skin I don't know how many times, but every single time it hurts. And so make sure you got it under that edge before you go and put a lot of pressure on it. Hopefully I won't do it on video. That should be tight enough for the first knot. All right, so we have this top knot almost done, but I believe we need to come in one more time and actually I have a little, I actually like it to be a little, I like to tap it a little bit harder than what I can do on this table for this video, so you can really smack it hard. So I'm not gonna put the fit in there anymore. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna squeeze it in my hands and pull each one really tight while I'm rolling it in my fingers. And that will make it somewhat round. Like I said earlier, if you wanted to skive the edge of this lace on the inside, just, you know, on a 45-degree angle or a little steeper, or not steeper, but shallower angle, I think you could even get a little more round look to it. And let's, just because these can be a little bit confusing, we'll show you one more. Same exact thing. Little shorter lace to work with this time. So we're going to fold it. This goes over this side. So these two are the same color. And these two are the same color, right? It's somewhat tight. And like I said, I start in the same place. So if this was red, well, let's say this was red and this was black, and you wanted red to be on top, well, this one would be red, so would this one. So this is accurate. If this was black, you'd want to start with that black one first if you wanted it underneath, and vice versa. You come around, just one over, you're only going on you're going on to the inside of this lace here, just past this one lace, which is the same color, and up. Okay. And then this one is going to go around this lace, which is the same color. And then this one goes around this one and will be on top. Kangaroo lace is, you know, I don't know if you're using a different material for lace, then I don't know what to tell you, because I just can't imagine a better material than kangaroo. I would never try this with calf. So we'll start to shrink that down a little bit, pull it tight. I don't know if you noticed the direction we were going, but it will be the opposite direction if you're right-handed, and it will confuse you. If you're fighting it, you can actually fight it and go back the other way, but you'll be like, why is this not working? Even though you may not understand why. It's because it naturally wants to go in one direction. And so you just have to see which direction your lace wants to go in. I believe it'll just be the opposite direction from this when you're doing it right-handed. I believe that's the only difference, really. I've helped hoodmakers before on that aspect alone. They didn't know why they were having so much trouble with it. And it was basically just the direction that the leather needed to go. Lace. I just wanted to get that a little bit tighter. Before I put water on it, started to hammer on it, I think. Just make it a little tighter. So aesthetically, I think that this top knot should be pretty much the same size as this. Well, what happens in the process, there's a little thread there I want to get off, but what happens in the process when you do this first top knot, you're going to shrink the size of this lace a little bit. So you have to pay attention to how tight you make this second one, or you can make it smaller than the top one. If you want it smaller, then that's fine. Just make it the same tightness. There's really no reason structurally. This bottom top knot, you want to have it tight enough to where it is snug on the top of the hood. You don't want to be able to wobble it. That you can see the leather of the hood flexing. So it's really about as tight as you can get it. And you really don't want it any tighter than that. I mean, you can if you want. And some guys even put spikes in here, little nails. They'll epoxy little nails in here to make it really tight. What happens is you're still going to have flex in this part of the hood. When it comes down to it, it's not going to make a lot of difference. This area is going to weaken over time. There's no way around it unless you're going to put a plate across, both sides. I mean, you want to engineer something like that, that's great, but I'm just, going to let it take its natural course. Hoods they can be pretty fine creations, but my hoods are made to use. I make them to fit. That's my priority, is that they fit the birds they're going on, and they're made to be functional. And if you want to put them on Matthew Kirkwood was doing a hood contest. I guess he's done it for a few years, and he asked me, I think it was, maybe a year or 2 years ago, I think he asked me to judge the last 2 hoods. And he sent them to me. He's up in North Dakota, and he sent them to me, and I'm like, holy cow, those hoods were just beautiful. And I don't know who made them. Whenever you're a judge, you shouldn't really know who the competitors are to make it fair. And I don't think, I'm guessing, but I don't think either one of them were Americans. But they had their engravings and their paint. One of them had ink. I think it would have been India ink, and the drawings and engravings. They're just absolutely beautiful hoods. Even the shape on both of them, they were both the same size, I believe. The shapes look like they would fit, even though that wasn't what we were judging. But I don't. Well, I just don't make hoods like that, because it's an ornament. For me, that would be an ornament. And I've done it before when I was younger. I made feather plumes and all that. And to be honest with you, I frankly don't like making that stuff. I like these earth tone hoods. I've got this hood here. I'll show you while I'm talking about it. See, now if you look, that's about the right size. I'm going to hammer it one more time to try and make it more consistently round, and pull it one more time, and I think we'll be done with that. But I'll bring this hood in since I'm talking about it. So this is about as ornate as my hoods get, and it is ornate. It's got that frog skin or toad skin in the different colors, and these the raised oval and these little spacers and that, and I do like the looks of that, but that's going to go on a bird. That should go on a bird. It shouldn't go on a shelf. If you want to put it on a shelf, that's fine, but that's not really why I made that hood. In fact, I'm hoping to be using that hood on a bird next summer. So back to this, we will hammer on this second knot, and you can hammer on both of them really when they're both the same size like that, but I tend to keep it on an angle. And actually, the person that showed me this was Ricardo Velarde. I was at his house one time. It was a long time ago. We were looking at some leather, and actually Ricardo made some beautiful hoods back in the day. You can imagine how good he is with his bells and his knives. He made some beautiful hoods, fit really well too. And I was at his house one time, and he says, here, do this to roll out that top knot a little better. There's a little crinkly leather here, but you can kind of pull that out if you want. So for me, that's how I do the top knots for my filled hoods. I am very simplistic in the rest of it, so I just cut this off in the leftover lace. I'll basically just soak it in water for a minute, not even a minute. 10 or 15 seconds is plenty enough to soak into that kangaroo. And you don't want to really get water. Some colors will kind of stain if you're not careful with that excess water. Basically, kind of try and straighten it up, mold it in your fingers. This can turn a little bit more. Right? And then take a little bit of thread. I'll just take a little bit off of this real quick. Put a little wax on it because wax is wonderful for leather work. Make a little loop. Tie that baby on there. It's ready for braces. Okay, so these are the braces that my wife makes for me, and she makes them for a few other hood makers out there. It's 2-ply Ultrex is the name of the material. We can't use Gore-Tex for this legally. When she makes them, they come in a strand. It's about 20, I think they're about 27 or 28 inches. And so I just cut them in half, and that's plenty. I think this is probably 12 or 13 inches, and that's plenty for a hood. And I even like them, I even leave them a little bit long. So this is just real simple. We'll just do a couple of buttons. You want a good sharp hole punch for this stuff. And that's my little Annie dog in the crate. She thinks she should get out. She thinks she should be part of the video. But she would tear this place apart. Okay, so we'll do the other one. I like this material. It's got enough texture to have a little bit of friction. So we're gonna just put them up side by side. The thread is on that side, on the right side. I'm gonna come in and poke holes. I've done enough of these. I just kind of guesstimate, and I've compared them to others that I do, and they're usually pretty darn close. So I like about this much. And I try and stay off the thread if I can, just off to the edge, but I don't worry too much about it if it gets there, because it doesn't have to be in the middle. You can see they're not perfectly in the center of the brace, and I punched 3 holes. Now a lot of guys want to cut that with a scalpel or whatever. I've found that I like these holes better. And then one brace needs, on a Dutch hood, because it has to go across that width, they need to be a little bit wider, and it's about this much, about 3/4 of an inch. And I only poked 2 holes on that one, which kind of tightens up the brace. If you do 3, the braces seem like they don't last quite as long. They may only last 1 season or 2, I don't know, but it seems like with just a little bit tighter, they'll last a little longer. So on the hood, we're going to come in, we're going to punch this, and of course you don't want to hit your stitching, and just come in with that chisel. Stay away from that stitching, that point right there, and do the inside. Make sure you're far enough away, but not too far. Same here, we can go. Yeah, like a little bit closer. Okay. Let's do this. Take this. Now, this is just my natural side to do first. I always do this first. It's just from habit. I go in those last 2. Bring this up. Put the lace through, or the brace, and pull it to the edge of that top hole. One thing about this hole, you don't want it sitting past here. That's what I believe is the main cause for feathers to get caught in the hood. I believe something about the way this hole gets past there, for some reason the way it closes, it seems to attach itself to a feather. So we're going to come in that same slot, and just go down there, and then come up through here. Just push in. So that's good. If it's underneath this, that's fine. It might be a little harder for you to find, but it's very normal the way I make braces. It's, I like it right there where it's at. I'll come in with this other one. Now the Arab hoods, I do the exact same way. I braid them. I braid them through the exact same way. The only difference is this is all solid leather, and then you've got slits. Well, once I put this one in, I leave it and go to this one in the Arab hood and the Dutch. But I do it that way in the Arab hood because you're going to go up above and go down, then under, and then up above and under. And you've got to do that with this brace that doesn't have the hole in it that you're going to slide under. See, so this brace, when I'm done, this brace will go in above this one. And that's just, whether it's Arab style or Dutch. So just find the hole, both of the holes. Pretty simple. Go through, make a nice big opening, and see if you can get that in there. Even if only one of them comes out, which typically happens. Just pull it through. Okay, so if you've done a good job, they should come together pretty tight, right? And if you want them to be a little better than that, this is in the pattern too, by the way. The reason this comes together like this is because it's in the pattern that way. That's the way I designed the pattern. And voila. Okay, so the only other thing I would do here is I just cut. Well, let me tell you how much I cut. So there's the hood's open. You want the brace that you're going to put your teeth on to be a little longer than the button, right? Well, of course you will put your teeth on the button too, but to close it. So I just put a couple fingers above that button, and I just cut them out on a pretty upward angle, and that's pretty much it. The only other thing I will do on this hood, besides put a little name tag in, is cut the beak opening, the bottom of the beak opening, and I'll get my turbo glasses for that. And basically the edge, because the way we took that beak hole, that piece out, we cut it on an angle, so you can see it's pretty good sharp angle. Where it's not good is on the bottom. It's just a blunt, flat edge. So we're going to take this and clean that up. Is it really necessary? No, it's not super necessary, but it's just to finish, one of those finishing touches. And I try to remember to do it on every hood, and you can stay just under that surface. Keep it as clean as you can. More little spot there is where I like that little area punched out, that hole punched in the corner there. It's just makes a nice clean finish. That's done. So that hood's done, except I will cut this off when it's dry, and it's ready to go to try on. This is a number 18, so good sized tiercel Gere Peregrine. It'll fit really well. So when you're storing a hood, because they have memory, the leather tends to have memory. And by the way, this leather keeps drying. It dries, and as it dries, it shrinks. And that's why you'll see the hoods kind of get smaller over age. It's just the way the leather functions. But anyway, it is best to store them. I believe it's best to store them open, because that's the memory. That's the best way to keep that memory, because when you want to hood the bird, you want to be able to put it over the bird. If these braces get worn out and soft, and you've been storing it closed, then that's the memory the hood's going to keep. And then when you pull this out, when you open it, of course this is fresh, and any used hood's still going to have a little bit of that memory from being closed, but it's going to have more so if you store it that way. So we like to store them open, photograph them when they're closed. Okay, so we'll show you how to brace an Arab hood. It's really not much different. I like to just cut these off. Everybody has a different idea of what the top knot should look like, how they want them to look. Mine's fairly basic, just like everything else on my hoods. I love this chisel, and for these, let's see, this is, I believe, a number 16. So for these hoods, I might use my other chisel, which is slightly smaller. I think this is close to 3/8. I'm not sure exactly. Well, I can tell you. It's real close to 3/8. It's a little bit under. It's 9 millimeters. And this is more like 7 millimeters. So maybe just a little bit more. But because the stitching is kind of close on this particular pattern, I like to use the smaller one. It also helps to tighten those braces just a little bit. Basically just chop. Make sure you don't hit any string, because that's any thread, I mean, that's a big mistake. That would be a big mistake. I think I've kind of got over making those kind of mistakes occasionally, ever so rarely. So anyway, I'm left-handed. I start with this side. It's just natural for me. Okay, so I use the brace with 2 holes poked in it to start with, and you put the fit in and take it in this way all the way to the hole closest to the button, and then go straight down through that in between those two slits. And pull it through. Now, since the other side, because we have the hole on this side, since the other side has to go underneath this one, we're going to do that one first as far as feeding it all the way through. Actually, I'm going to turn it upside down, a little more natural. Okay, make sure that's a nice, clean fit. And then just skip each one, so you're going over one and under the next. Maybe. Sometimes it's a little tight. Good. Okay, let's try this again. This is on these Arab hoods. I use for here, for this part, the eye panel and back, I use kangaroo, and it's not necessarily thick kangaroo. It's around 1 millimeter. The other part of the hood is calf. It's a little bit thicker, so there is a little bit of a step from here down to the thinner leather, but it really just doesn't matter at all. You need the kangaroo because it's a little more flexible, and when you're going to make these pleats, this accordion back, the calf just isn't flexible enough for that kind of thing. You could use suede leather, something a little softer. I have actually tried that, and I still prefer the kangaroo, the veg tan kangaroo. Basically, you're just coming under that bridge right there to put in that. And then make sure it's in there nice and clean, no problems, and then you can just feed it back through. This one. There's no real, that I know of, there's no real shortcut here. You can try to do 2 or 3 of these, go under 2 or 3 of these bridges at a time if you want, but I'll try it here just to see how it works. Works out okay. I'm always one for saving time if you can. Back in the late 80s or early 90s, I don't remember how long ago it was, but I was really proud of myself when I was able to make a hood in less than 5 hours. Might have even been mid-90s, I'm not sure. Okay, so we're just going to take a little water and dampen this, get it nice and wet. But anyway, I was really pretty happy. I remember telling my wife I got this hood done, just a normal filled Dutch hood done in less than 5 hours, and that's pretty good. And I thought, well, and at the time I was probably charging about $65, and I just recently, just like a few days ago, timed myself, but when I say time myself, I mean total hands-on work on the hood, not while it's drying, after you've wet it and that, but total hands-on. And I can tell you that it was less than half that time. I won't tell you exactly because it doesn't matter. I don't want to brag or disappoint anyone, but I was pretty impressed with how fast I had done it. and I get about twice the amount of money for those same hoods. So I've gotten better. It's just like anything, the more you do. Let's see, see if I can make this visible to you. These pleats need to be kind of honed out there. You can see, when you close the hood, you can kind of see where they need to be. And sometimes you'll get one and it just folds perfect. You don't hardly even have to do anything to it, but you'll see you kind of have to get in there and place those pleats. These hoods do take a little bit longer than a Dutch hood. And the leather's pretty soft right now. You need it to be soft, but at the same time it makes it a little more difficult to work with because it is soft. Now you can tighten this again. Try and even that out. This isn't the perfect finish. So you may have to spend a little more time going back and forth on the inside and back out just to make them about as clean as you think you can get them. And as the hood dries, you can actually work on it a little bit just before it's dry and make them a little bit cleaner. This just doesn't want to take that nice shape, but it will. It will. By the time this hood is finished, it will have a nice, consistent pleat to the back of it. Okay, and if you want to just keep it running, we'll go into patterns. So I brought a few patterns to show you guys. This is, let's see, this is my standard Dutch hood pattern. You can see it's coming apart. I won't use this again because the cardstock is worn out. You can see what happens to the beak. You can only use them so many times, and then you're going to have a problem with the size fitting. It's really important to try and get the thickest cardstock you can get. This is my Dutch hood, which would be like that. This is my Arab hood that I came up with pattern. I've actually got the date on it, 2011. Be this one I've got. I didn't bring one of these hoods down. I guess I should have, but this is the newest pattern for a you might call it a Dutch Arab hood. You know, I just call it my new hood, my new Arab hood. And I did this so that I could do lizard skin on the eye panels and raise the crown with an oval here, just more of about my fanciest hood. And then this is just a one-piece Indian hood pattern. I really like this pattern for like goshawks and that. Not that these hoods don't fit goshawks and Coopers, because they do, but these are very lightweight. They're, you know, I can make them quicker and they're not quite as expensive. So if somebody wants a less expensive hood, then I can do that for them. Okay, so we'll go over how to laminate lizard skin or toad skin on eye panels. One thing, I personally would never use snake skin for eye panel. This is, I believe, tegu skin, tegu lizard. The reason I say that is it's too thin. It just isn't going to last. It's not very durable. I personally wouldn't use stingray skin for eye panels because those sharp little calcium deposits on there are, I don't think, there's a possibility it could be harmful to the bird's foot. And so anyway, I love this kind of leather. It's, you know, 0.4, 0.5 millimeters thick. And I like the pattern here, this belly pattern. and I will use, sometimes I'll use, if I'm trying to fit it in a certain area, this, anywhere on here is going to work, but if I'm trying to fit it in a certain area, I will use, a pencil to mark it out. You can kind of see where the center of those markings, those natural markings are on the lizard. So you want to stay on either side of that. You want to leave yourself ample room to cut an edge, right? And one good reason to have a pencil is if you draw it on, and I didn't think to bring a pencil, but you can brush this on the lizard skin, or you can brush it on the eye panel. It doesn't matter. But if you do use a pencil, you can draw it out on there and then just brush this contact cement right into that area. There's no reason not to have plenty of that glue, but that was just a little too much. You want it to be nice and wet when you go and put it on. And just kind of move it around, kind of squish it in there. Squishy. Leave yourself about 1/4 of an inch from the center. This stuff actually absorbs pretty well. I love this glue. Not necessarily the smell of it, but it's a good glue. It's not, gonna hold can't tow a truck with it or anything like that, but some pretty good glue. Try to keep it off. Try to keep your glue off of the eye panel like what I just did. It'll actually collect dirt. But the nice thing about it too is it will rub off. Basically, if it won't rub off, you can scrape it with a scalpel. If it really bothers you, just scrape it. So it really doesn't take much time. You don't really need to wait too long for that. Basically, just start cutting that out. Now this is probably 1/2 millimeter thick. It's fairly stiff. Toad skin, a lot of times you get it, it's pretty thin. You have to be careful not to use something that's too thin. Also, the leather, I'm going to use a thicker leather for the body and a thinner leather. This is kangaroo, and it's probably about 0.9 to 1 millimeter thick, whereas the body will be probably 1.2 mils. So this will still end up being a little bit thicker than the body, the centerpiece, but it won't matter. You get a little step, no one's going to notice or complain usually. At least I haven't seen it. I just cut the corners to make it easier to finish when it put glue on these other parts. Okay, back to the glue. Contact cement, it's Weldwood contact cement, it's good stuff. It's like, it used to be like $5 for a bottle, now it's like $7. And they used to have thinner, they used to sell thinner for this stuff. That was really, it was really nice because these bottles kind of wear out, they dry out, but you get halfway through and they're pretty dry because you've opened up the lid so many times. And that thinner, I could just add a little bit of thinner and it'd make it brand new I used the whole bottle, and whatever, probably some rule was made that was harmful. I don't know. All these carcinogens, everything's a carcinogen nowadays. But I'm still here. and just basically put a nice, make sure you get it up along the edge of that. Now this you will have to let dry. The reason I've got red coming off in my glue is because I actually dyed this. This is kind of a pinkish color, and I dyed it red, dark red. I'm not a big fan of pink hoods. However, I did get a call for one just recently. Now these, one thing about laminating hoods like this, lizard or toad or whatever you're going to use, it does it does make the hood less porous, the leather less porous, and so these actually, in the cold weather, you know, you see those, some birds close their eyes in the hood and some birds don't, you know, especially passage birds. I don't think they really, if they're not asleep, they're not closing their eyes, and so they'll get, especially in the cold weather, they get condensation coming from their eyes. And the lizard skin hoods will tend to make that just a little bit worse, in my opinion. I haven't done any scientific studies, but I believe I believe the leather breathes a little bit, and it doesn't breathe at all once you laminate it. There is another laminate that I've used, and that's billiard felt. And I actually like that, the look of the billiard felt. The birds can scratch it for years and years, and it just doesn't change. It's just fluffy and doesn't really change. And so we'll get back to this after a few minutes after it dries. Now our glue has dried, and this is the reason they call it contact cement, is because once it's dry, you just push your other glued part against it, and it's pretty well glued. So come in with some pretty sharp scissors. So I can just see if I can show that, and just kind of keep that along that edge. You can see there's a little left over. You got to clean that edge up pretty good. Basically, and then come in like this. And of course, around the sharper turns, if it's really stiff, it's going to be a little bit of a headache. But just be diligent, just keep pushing it towards there. You'll see this wants to flex out, but it's still glued well enough to stick. And just come in and just kind of stay along that edge. All right. That's pretty much it. You might need to go and just clean up little points where you went through there. You can pretty much hide any flaws if you're good at sewing, making good cross stitches. You can easily hide any flaws underneath that stitch. And that leather, you got to remember that it's going to it's going to shrink. Leather still shrinks as it ages. Years, you know, a year or two later, it's still changing, and so hoods shrink a little bit. And what happens when you have lizard or frog or something, you know, it has memory. When you glue it flat, it has memory to want to go back to flat. So when you mold these hoods on the mold on your block, leave them on that block. You know, I usually, once the hood's dry, if it's just regular leather, I usually take it off once it looks like it's dry, 4 or 5 hours after I started. You know, 4 hours, it's pretty dry. But these things, you really want to leave them on the block. If you can, leave them on the block overnight, and it'll help change that memory a little bit, make it want to stay the shape of the block. So basically you just make your marks, poke your holes, you know, and come out on this edge just like you would regular leather. If you have to, if you see your thread outside, if you haven't got it quite tied enough or your hole's a little too far over the edge, get a red marker and just mark it. It's pretty easy to hide. So there you go. Well, this beautiful bird is Israel's jerkin. Slight hybridization, but pretty much 7/8 jerkin. And we just put this hood on him to see, just kind of talk about fit. And he just made this beautiful rouse for us to really make it look right on his head. You can see this is the kind of beak opening that I like. There's plenty of options out there. The one that comes down and crosses over the lips is also could easily be done, especially on my blocks that have the beak. If they do make any kind of a mark, it's a little tiny scab that within 2 weeks dries up and flakes off, so it's not a big deal. But you can see this hood goes pretty well on this bird, besides the colors matching also. I mean, the colors look good too on this type of this color of a gyr. This is actually an accordion backed hood. See if he'll give you a shot of the back. And it's just my kind of fit. I think he's doing all right in it. We just barely put it on him, just a fresh hood, and that's just what I'm going for when I make a hood. That's the look that I'm going for. And you know, using that skull, that falcon skull, as a reference for shape, geometry, I think it's come out really well. This is a hood that's actually off my new block, the 4th generation block, and I'm pretty well pleased. Nice to see it on a hood. Nice to actually hold the bird that it's sitting on, which I don't get to do very often anymore, but I'll have a bird like this next summer, so if everything goes well. So